If you will please close your eyes and join me in prayer. Dear God, please help me to set aside everything I think I know about you, about A Course in Miracles, about the Holy Bible, about myself, about other people, about this world. God, please enable me to have an open mind and a new experience with you, A Course in Miracles, the Bible, myself, other people, this world. God, I thank you. Please help me to be who you would have me be, do what you would have me do, go where you would have me go, and say what you would have me say. Please give me your vision and help me to be a conduit of love in this world. Amen. Hello. Today we are on day 16 and we'll be picking up the reading in Cameo 8, the Mother of the Children. We are reading A Course in Miracles, CE 2017, complete and annotated edition, Chapter 1, Principles of Miracles. And this is indeed the Purple Book. Cameo 8, the Mother of the Children. After the teaching following Miracle Principle 35, Helen took down a series of personal comments, beginning with these about a Freudian slip that Bill had made. Tell Bill that his slip about rivets should be noted. Some slips reach consciousness from the un-Christ-controlled subconscious and betray a lack of love. But others come from the superconscious, which is in communion with God and which can also break into consciousness. His slip, 1, your text adds rivet, was an expression of a soul gaining enough strength to request freedom from prison. It will ultimately demand it. All quotations without page numbers in this cameo are from Helen's notes. Throughout these cameo essays, we have corrected spelling errors in the notes for ease in reading. We don't have the actual story of Bill's slip, but Jesus seems to refer to it in at least 4 separate places. 3 in chapter 1 of the text and 1 in chapter 5. From these references, we gain the following picture. Jesus told Bill, either directly or through Helen, that there was just one more river. Based on later clues, this is one more river. This one more river seems to be the last thing standing between Bill and his release. The question then arose of what this one more river was. At one point later on, Jesus explains that the one more river is related to sex. This then kicks off the lengthy discussion of sex that begins under Miracle Principle 43 and continues under 46. When Jesus said one more river, however, Bill misheard this as rivet. Jesus later calls this an intelligent mishearing, a Freudian slip. He says in the passage we've quoted above that this mishearing was an expression of a soul gaining enough strength to request freedom from prison. This request for freedom, however, was somewhat weak and ambivalent. It meant that, as Jesus later says, even though Bill wanted release, he was not able to cope with it at the time. However, as Bill's soul gains more strength, it will go from merely requesting freedom to demanding it. Then his desire will be unequivocal and freedom will be his. Since this slip was about freedom from prison, we might speculate that the meaning of rivet is that there was only one more rivet holding Bill's prison cell together. If this interpretation is correct, it means Bill unconsciously saw himself as close to release, just one more rivet, but believed his prison cell was still held together by something too strong to break. This reflected his inner ambivalence. He wanted release, but wasn't sure he could handle it. We often think of Freudian slips as betraying a lack of love, as Jesus says here. However, Jesus goes beyond Freud in explaining that some slips, including this one, are actually a case of a holy part of the mind breaking into consciousness. His slip was an expression of his soul. The term soul is sometimes used in the early chapters of the Course to denote a spiritual element in ourselves that retains its heavenly purity but experiences itself as imprisoned by our mind's illusions, like a heavenly creature pulled down to an earthly cage. The Course actually uses this image. See Workbook Lesson 128.6. Because of the experiences Bill and Helen have been having, his soul is no longer content with its cage. It wants freedom, though it is still too weak to resist Bill's attraction to his comfort zone. But that is temporary. As his soul continues to grow in strength, the day will come when it reasserts its will and simply exits the cage, leaving it behind forever. This picture of Bill's soul is clearly similar to a vision that Helen had some months before. This was the first inner vision she had in the series of experiences that culminated in the beginning of the Course dictation. In this vision, she saw herself as an ancient priestess, wrapped in chains and kneeling. Then, as the vision recurred over the weeks, the chains slowly fell away, and the priestess began to rise. This vision seems to have been a portrayal of Helen's soul, which means that both her soul and Bill's soul, as a result of their recent experiences, were going through the same process of slowly rising from imprisonment. As the dictation continues, the writing suddenly switches in both tone and content, as Helen takes down this soaring praise of who she really is. You are wholly lovely, a perfect shaft of pure light. Before your loveliness, the stars stand transfixed and bow to the power of your will. What do children know of their creation except what their Creator tells them? You were created above the angels because your role involves creation as well as protection. You who are in the image of the Father need bow only to Him, before whom I kneel with you. This picture stands, of course, in stark contrast to how we normally view ourselves. In traditional Christianity, we stand beneath the stars a little lower than the angels. And that's Psalm 8:5. And should humbly bow before Jesus. Here, however, Helen is told that being the created, she cannot know the manner of her creation. Only her Creator knows, and what He tells her is that she was created so high that the stars and even the angels bow before her, and that Jesus Himself kneels beside her before God. Being in the very image of the Father, Helen should bow only to God Himself. Yet why was this given to her? As beautiful as it is, it seems entirely without context. Jesus now explains why this revelation, using the standard meaning of the word, not the Course's special meaning, came through at this time. Note, this revelation was permitted because you did not project onto Bill the blame for your omission to ask me if you should transcribe the notes. The fact that he should have done so does not exempt you from your own omission. Thanks for blessing him with a miracle instead of cursing him with projection. Apparently, Helen and Bill have both neglected to ask Jesus if they should transcribe the notes, type up the recent dictation she had received. Helen could easily have shifted all the blame for this onto Bill. After all, he should have remembered to ask. Had she blamed him, however, Helen would have been projecting her responsibility onto him in an attempt to offload her guilt. But she didn't, and this seemingly minor act of refusing to blame Bill meant that, according to Jesus, she blessed him with a miracle instead of cursing him with projection. Here, then, is another concrete example of a miracle in this early material. And like the other examples, it is an ordinary expression of love from one person to another. But why did giving this a miracle allow Jesus to give Helen that revelation about her true identity? According to the Course, giving miracles is what opens our mind to who we really are. Whenever we see holiness come through us, we become open to receiving a holy vision of ourselves, which is exactly what happened to Helen in this case. Note further, he needn't feel concerned about it either. So he forgot. Happens all the time, until the habit of asking becomes involuntary. Now Jesus reassures Bill. Helen has let him off the hook for forgetting, and Jesus urges Bill to let himself off. Jesus, in essence, says, "Don't worry about it, so you forgot to ask. This is perfectly normal, until the asking becomes an involuntary habit." In other words, while letting Bill off the hook for his error, Jesus lays out the goal that, when accomplished, will ultimately correct such errors. His comment implies a process in which we first voluntarily choose to ask for guidance. Yet, as we repeatedly exercise this choice, it becomes a habit. This habit then continues to solidify until it becomes so ingrained that asking is no longer a voluntary act. It happens as involuntarily as breathing. Now comes a somewhat puzzling exchange between Helen and Jesus, made more puzzling by the fact that it is very difficult to transcribe. The angle brackets indicate words that we are uncertain about. Helen, Jonathan, Helen's husband, Louis. Check and bank book. He said he would find it at home in the leather holder. Not there. Call back. Jesus, no. Want to because your revelation? You have thrown away more money than he ever had. Now call, but just ask him gently to look in his coat again. Helen, found it among a lot of letters. Louis says, do not know how they got there. Louis, it seems, has lost the check and bank book and is at home looking for it. Helen appears to be anxious over this. Jesus is clearly trying to get her to go easy on him. He first tells her not to call back and questions her motives for wanting to do so. He also says you have thrown away more money than he ever had, presumably through her love of shopping. Jesus then recommends that she call back with the gentle suggestion that Louis look in his coat again. But it turns out that Louis has found what he had lost. This, however, as we will see, is not the end of the subject. In the midst of this mundane exchange, material keeps coming through about the loftiness of Helen's real nature and role. First there was the revelation about her true identity, and now she is likened to Mother Mary. Blessed are you with Mary as the mother of the children. Jesus then tells her to put in insert now, and Helen adds, which I did. This refers to the comment, you have thrown away more money than he ever had. which Helen writes at the top of the page with an arrow indicating where it should go. This comment has clearly gotten her attention because she then writes, "Then I asked for forgiveness for having thrown away all that money, but he said, 'It's all right. You lived in scarcity now. You lived in scarcity then, but now you are forgiven, so you live in abundance. There is no longer any need to throw anything away or want for anything either." Helen is feeling guilty about having thrown away all that money. Jesus tells her it's all right, saying that it's just what you do when you live in scarcity. That's just what you do when you live in scarcity. When you believe you are lacking inside, of course you try to fill your lack with things from the outside. But that's all behind her now. He has forgiven her, as he told her earlier, when you have been forgiven, you have everything else. Thus, the lack inside is gone, and with that, her whole relationship with material things will be healed. She won't need to throw money away to fill her inner lack, and she won't need to worry about outer lack. Jesus implies that her inner abundance will actually protect her against outer lack. So being forgiven leads to the realization of inner abundance, which leads to the right relationship with outer things. Interestingly, Jesus reassures Helen in a manner very similar to how he has just reassured Bill for forgetting to ask. In both cases, he says, "Don't feel guilty about what you did. It's just the natural outgrowth of the mental state you have been in." Yet he doesn't leave it at that. He then speaks of a new mental state from which a new corrected behavior will automatically flow. At this point, Helen seems to have had some kind of inner experience, and then writes the following: "Infant Christ," reference, or child Christ. "Behold the handmaid of the Lord, be it done unto me according to thy will." This last statement is quite a dramatic thing for Helen to write. It is a quotation of Mary's statement in the Gospel of Luke in which she accepts her role as mother of the Savior. "Behold the handmaid of the Lord, be it unto me according to thy word." 5. Luke 1:38. Based on a later comment, 6, see Cameo 12, it is clear that Helen inwardly heard this quotation rather than merely thought it up. But Jesus thinks that something has gone wrong, that Helen's interpretation of this statement is from her ego. He does not mince words. Egocentric is right. I do not need another physical mother, and she was the only one who conceived without any lack of love. But I told you before that many are born who have not been reborn. I mentioned it to you and Bill in connection with your own parent. The sentence ends unfinished. Based on this response, it seems that Helen may have entertained the thought that Jesus would be physically born again through her. Indeed, shortly after this, Jesus refers to Helen's false pregnancy notions, which were as an unconscious attempt to fill her sense of inner scarcity. Jesus clearly thinks that Helen's ego has taken ownership of the references to Mary she has been hearing. In Cameo 12, we will see that Helen learns from this experience because the next time she hears this biblical quote, she is able to interpret it in an egoless way. While putting Helen in her place, Jesus reveals some important things about his physical life. First, he says, "I will not be born again into a physical body." He has transcended that. Second, he appears to clarify the manner of his birth 2,000 years ago. His reference to Mary, conceiving without any lack of love, seems to be an allusion to his recent statement that sex is often associated with lack of love. 7. See text 128. The lack of love comes from using sex for personal gratification, whereas it should be used as a selfless channel for bringing children into the world. To say that Mary conceived without any lack of love, then, is to imply that she used sex properly, to imply, in other words, that she did conceive Jesus through sexual intercourse, but that she did so with a singularly high state of mind, one that was free of any lovelessness whatsoever. If this interpretation is correct, then here is the same purity that we find in the concept of the virgin birth, only in this case expressed in the act of sex. This was such a high accomplishment, apparently, that she was the only one who achieved it. See text 8. Oh, we didn't get there, I'm sorry. If Helen is not to give birth to Jesus physically, then why is she hearing things that liken her to Mary? Things like, "Blessed are you with Mary as the mother of the children, and behold the handmaid of the Lord." The clue lies in Jesus' comment, "I told you before that many are born who have not been reborn." This is a reference to his first discourse on sexuality, and that's number 8, text 1. His point there is that Helen does not need to be a physical mother. Rather, she can be a spiritual mother to those who have been physically born, but have not yet been spiritually reborn. By referring to that statement in the current context, Jesus is implying that the way Helen can be this mother is by being a spiritual version of Mother Mary. Like Mary, she can bring Jesus into the world, but in this case, what she will bring in is not his body, but his teaching. This is how she can manifest the child Christ. This is how she can achieve motherhood and fill her sense of lack. She can give birth to A Course in Miracles. She can give birth to A Course in Miracles, and so she does. Thank you for joining with me. I love you. I am so grateful that we read Cameo 8 together, the Mother of Children.